I'm just confused because earlier on in the conversation, we were talking about like unjust treatment between women, or like how this can be one example or another. I felt like you were saying like, oh, but is that really oppression? And it's like, yeah, if it's an unjust treatment, or at least what we perceive to be unjust, maybe there's a deeper conversation there. Then it would fall under the category of oppression.
Typically, it's like, when I think of oppression, it typically comes from like some...
Like systematic oppression? Is that what you mean? Like it's an institution
but
enforcing it?
But if something unjust happens to me, it's not clear if I'm being oppressed, because you could have some unjust thing occur to you in a romantic relationship. That doesn't mean you're oppressed. Typically, it seems like some sort of top-down oppression.
So you're saying it has to be structural. That's what I'm trying to clarify.
Well, no, it could be multiple. So it could be structural, right? That could be a way that it's done.
Yeah.
But it could be group-based that doesn't have like a big, massive structure. So like I would say gang activity would be oppressive, right?
Yeah. It just can't be.
Saint_Easy donated $200. Well, there's dominance and authority and diplomacy and empathy, which shouldn't be confused.
That's true.
Well put.
Wait,
well put, St. Reezy.
That's
In any case,
stupid.
It's wise.
I guess whatever your sense of oppression is, I guess, how do you feel you're oppressed? And we won't linger here too long, but...
Okay, I think at least an institutional level, there has been like multiple studies conducted where it seems that it's, regardless of your qualifications, regardless if you're even like more qualified for a position, if you have like a female sounding name or a female looking name or whatever, you are less likely to be seen as competent or less likely to be hired for the job compared to your male counterparts.
I'm just curious, who conducted those studies? Was it a feminist studies program that had already determined what the answer to the study would be before conducting said study?
That's not how most studies are conducted.
Of course. Wait, that happens all the time. You go in with a bias and you're seeking to confirm your bias.
The whole point of at least the studies that I'm citing, right, is that in general you have the experimental design, right, where they decide like, okay, how are we going to measure this? Okay, we're going to put let's say 2 resumes, one more qualified than the other. We're going to blank the names and then see like which ones the professors pick over and over again, right? Or which ones the professors lean more towards. Now we're going to give them the same sample or the same studies a little bit later, but we're going to unblank the names. And then if they're picking the ones that are like male more, despite before doing the reverse, well, that does show like some level of bias.
Okay.
Saint_Easy donated $200. How is it stupid?
Did somebody say
I'm agreeing with you.
I said it was stupid. I laughed and said it's stupid.
Oh, I see.
It's like being like, there's 4 words. It's like, yeah, that's
well,
not adding.
I guess
sorry.
What's happening in that study, let's assume that that study is valid. Is it actually applicable to what's going on in the real world? And also, I guess a counterpoint to that is, well, what about affirmative action? Because that seems that that's something that is actually happening, that is provably happening.
Yeah, so to my understanding, like affirmative action, when it usually takes place, it's like you have 2 resumes that are equally qualified, and then one like goes to like the minority group, basically, that isn't represented in your company enough or whatever.
Do women benefit from affirmative action?
They have in the past, but I think it's been like overstated how much they benefit by. Basically, at least from the stuff I've read, like even if you have like a person or a company that's saying like, oh yeah, like we're pro affirmative action, like that's what we want, that's what we're gonna do, that doesn't necessarily translate to reality. You can see this a lot in like STEM or engineering jobs where you do have women who are like in these like highly qualified fields or positions that are still seen as like less competent than their counterparts. Or in addition to this, if you want to talk about other systems of oppression, if you want to see like what rates why women drop out of said STEM field, said STEM job, a lot of it does correlate to like sexual harassment in the field or the chances of them being like, again, like diminished because of their sex. So it doesn't like, that's another form, I guess, that you can argue about oppression, that even in highly qualified fields, women are still more likely to experience sexual harassment or demeaning to their counterparts.
But isn't it also true that sexual harassment that men experience goes far less reported than the sexual harassment that women experience?
Yes, but even we're talking about like pure numbers wise, it seems like just in these fields in general, the more men that you have in a field, the more likely a woman in that field is going to get like sexually harassed.
Oh yeah, I mean, but that's just the odds of addition, right? So every new man that you add in increases the chances that something like that will happen.
Yeah, but then it also seems that like when the numbers are like 50-50 or whatever, women like 50-50 male, 50 women are still reporting, even like in private surveys, right? Like let's just say like anonymous survey data, shit like that, higher rates of sexual harassment than men.
Well, yeah, but,
even though it's
but
not
again,
through the
that
official.
could easily be offset by the fact that men report that they're sexually harassed far less.
Yeah, but we're
than
we're
women.
not talking about like official
They don't need to be
reports.
official.
men
They
really-
still
Okay.
report it less,
Well,
even if it's not official.
Well, men, part of the issue is that men often don't see something as sexually harassing a woman would, right? So like a lot of women will make like weird comments about a guy's ass or something like that. And they wouldn't necessarily report that as sexual harassment, but a woman might. So that there's a really big issue in like subjective reporting when it comes to like who's going to report what, because most men will probably not want to report.
But you would agree
any
with
of these
me
things.
that if the same behavior that a woman does to a man and a man does to a woman, which the woman would perceive, or most women would perceive as sexual harassment, or or not sexual harassment. And then the flip side to that is that if that same behavior is given towards a man, he just doesn't perceive it that way. That doesn't mean it isn't, right?
Oh, I fully agree with you. There's a really interesting study actually about, I think it was the CDC who was talking about like 1 in 3 women have experienced like sexual assault or something like that. But when you actually looked at the study, when they asked men, they didn't include for men that if a woman forcibly sits on you while you're erect, that is considered sexual assault. And so when they actually updated that, it turned out that the rates of sexual assault between both genders was a lot closer, because men were like, I had no idea that was sexual
Right.
assault. I was just kind of like, well, I mean, now that she's here, I didn't really want it, but, like, it
that
feels
would
good.
necessarily go far less reported then inside of all of these types of things. So when you're talking about this, I can kind of really point to something in this control that would be very difficult for you to compensate for, which is how do you control for that?
Okay, even if I grant you that, right?
Yeah.
There does seem to be like when it comes to what is it? Like let's say other forms of like sexual discrimination, whether it's like rates of promotion, or just straight up just seen as like competency. It does seem that just having like a male sounding name does give you a slight.
Yeah, but
well, I
I
don't-
got a refutation for this too. And this is something that I found, there was very similar studies done on black hiring versus white hiring, right? And so here's what they found. If you sent in a name that had like a black sounding name versus a white sounding name, they would look at the names of the white people more than the black sounding name, okay? So that kind of rolls into the same type of thing that you're talking about. But here's what was interesting about the controls for that study. What they didn't do is do the experiment in reverse and send in the black sounding name and then the like low class white sounding names like Bubba, Cletus, things like that. Had they introduced that control, the study would maybe have been completely different. So this same control apparatus might apply here when you're talking about female names versus male names. There could be that there's a lot of low class sounding female names, and they used far more of those than they did, the higher class male sounding names, for instance, or something like this. So unless I saw the control, I'd never be able to determine that, just like they didn't introduce the control the other way in the racial studies.
Yeah.
Well put. I do have to move it on.